Hi, I'm Gabi, and welcome to Gabbing with Gabi. In this series, we sit down with fellow oil painters who brought their knowledge and talent to the world via the internet. It's a chance for them to put down their paintbrushes, to step away from their easels, and to talk more about themselves. And that's also a great chance for all of us to get to know them a little bit better. And our guest today is John. John, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is John Kenward. I live in Eastern Ontario, Canada, with my wife and my two sons.
Awesome. And John, just to clarify, you oil paint, do you paint with any other mediums?
I paint with both oil and acrylic, sometimes one, sometimes the other, and sometimes both in the same painting.
Okay, wow. And do you do any other types of art besides painting?
No, just painting.
Okay, awesome. What do you prefer to paint as in subjects?
I describe what I do as imagined realism. So it's usually something that's at least partly or mostly made up. And a lot of the influence comes from my background in forestry and various other things in my life. But I don't have one specific thing. Like I don't just paint water, I don't just paint trees, or I don't just paint pets. I vary quite a bit, but for the most part, I like to imagine what I'm painting.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask you a little bit about, because I've seen a lot of your work. You do a lot of these sort of silhouettes in your pictures. What kind of developed? How did that develop?
I one thing I really like about painting is to sort of play on the light of it, and I find silhouettes work really nicely because they're contrast so much if you have varying different light sources, and you can use so many different light sources that I never even realized until I started painting what could be a light source, and I find it just adds a lot from a painting as opposed to just an ordinary photo that you could see.
Mm-hmm. And I think it makes them beautiful and unique. Really, I absolutely love your work. So
Thank you very much.
you're welcome. So when did you start oil painting, or painting in general?
I started about 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay. And
So
how did you get?
sorry?
And how did you get started?
It was quite a bit of a fluke, really. My neighbor, who also did daycare for us, asked my wife if she wanted to go to a paint night with her, and my wife didn't really want to have anything to do with painting, and she said, "Well, maybe John will go." And at first, I was kind of hesitant, and then I decided, "Well, I'd give it a try." So we both went, and my neighbor and I both loved it. We both went to 3 or 4 more, and she painted quite a bit by herself after that, and I really got interested in it and started to painting on my own, and it just took off from there.
Okay. And was that paint class an acrylic paint class, or was it oil?
That was acrylic.
Yeah.
So for the first few months, I was just doing acrylic, and then gradually started into oil after that on my own.
Okay. Awesome. Do you have any sort of art education?
No, none really at all. Just public school.
Okay. And what do you do in the real world, or what did you do for work?
I've had a few different jobs. For the first maybe 20 years of my professional life, adult life, I operated a sawmill business. Then I was doing that as well as I was a reseller on eBay for collector stamps. And then when I started getting into painting, it gradually became from a hobby to a business, and now that's what I do full time.
Awesome. Good for you. Do you ever paint on saw blades?
I haven't tried saw blades yet. I painted I paint on wood quite a bit, and I paint on canvas, and I have done a few miniature paintings on coins and made them independents. So I have painted on metal a little bit, but I've never tried a saw blade, but it's probably something I'll do sometime.
I would imagine, especially if you have a background in that stuff. And being in Ontario, I'm guessing that there's a fair amount of lumber up there, so you might be able to find some big saw blades.
Yeah, I probably could find some somewhere, and I definitely want to try that sometime.
Yeah, you do that. Is art something that kind of runs in your family, or is it just kind of you?
There is a little bit. In my immediate family, I was really the only one that had anything to do with it, and I didn't really have a lot of interest in it until I was in my 40s. And my grandmother did paint a little bit, and I have some more distant relatives that painted a little bit too, but there's not I would amount of it in my background.
Mm-hmm. Do you have other hobbies outside of painting?
Probably my biggest hobby outside of painting is gardening. That's probably because the first part of my life I was working outside a lot, and since I stopped working outside, then I'd like to spend a lot of time outside with gardening, growing vegetables and fruit trees and that kind of thing.
Okay. Do you do any flowers or just food?
Mostly not flowers, mostly just for vegetables and fruit.
What's your favorite vegetable to grow?
I like growing tomatoes. So many different kinds of tomatoes, and especially with my kids, especially when they were young, they'd love to just go to the tomato plants and especially the little miniature tomatoes. I'd like to just eat them right off the plants.
Yeah, I garden too, and I love growing tomatoes. They're very yummy.
So much better than what you can get in the store.
Oh, I know, those store ones taste like cardboard. Ugh. Um, do you teach art at all?
Not very much. When my oldest son was in grade 3, his teacher invited me to come in and do a class for them in their classroom, and that was a lot of fun. That was about 3 or 4 years ago. And then just last month, I did my first real teaching one for adults, and it's just the local CrossFit gym that I was a member of. We had a paint night there, and it was a lot of fun too.
Did you learn anything in that experience?
Yeah, you do learn a lot. It's easy to forget that when you're painting along yourself, and someone else who's, regardless of whether they're a beginner or painted a lot, they do things so much differently that you just have to slow down. Oh wait, this is how I do it all the time, so I know what I'm doing, but someone else is doing it. I imagine with more teaching experience, that kind of thing would come naturally. But it's like, oh yeah, I got to slow down and explain what I'm doing, not just do it and assume everyone else is going to follow right away.
Right, and you have to think about your process a little bit more too, I think.
That's right. That's exactly it. You have to not just do it, but explain how you're doing it, which is something in itself. But it also helps you learn yourself what you're doing, I think. So it's definitely a learning process for not just the students, but for myself as well.
Absolutely. What do you think makes you sort of unique as an artist?
I sort of touched on it before. I think the thing that makes me the most unique is that I don't like to use reference photos very much. For the most part, if it's coming from my imagination, I don't want it to look like a photo. I like it to look somewhat realistic, but at the same time, it's something that I don't want it to look like it was copied from something. I want it to look like it was imagined. So the other thing that I do that I find to be unique is the way that I do commissions. I don't even really consider that I do commissions. Some people will ask me, can you paint this for me? And I find a lot of other artists, they run into the problem of they'll get a deposit from someone and then the person doesn't like it, and then they're stuck because the person doesn't want the painting, but then they've already paid the deposit. So my way around that is I don't take any deposits, but I'm very particular of what I will paint for someone. So if someone suggests something that I think is something that I'd like to paint anyway, then I'll go ahead with it, and I'll just, rather than take a deposit, I'll just give that person first opportunity to purchase it. And if they don't want it, then I'll just offer it for sale publicly. And that way, nobody has to put money up front until they at least have seen a photo of the painting. And then I'm not left with a painting that I don't think I can sell either. So I find that works best for me.
Yeah, I just to hit on that a little bit, I'm actually the same. I have people all the time, can you paint this for me? Do you want me to pay for it? I'm like, I don't want you to pay for anything until you decide that you like it. And if it's something I can't handle painting, I'll tell you. And if it's not something, again, that I could sell to somebody else, if you don't like it, then I'm not going to paint it either. So yeah.
That makes the most sense to me.
Absolutely. If you had to pick one specific thing that you really, really like painting, what would you say it is?
Probably trees. I like trees. I grew up working in the forest all the time. So I have, I guess, a bit of a connection to trees, and I like growing them. I spent a couple of years up in Northern Ontario tree planting, and yeah, it's probably trees.
When you first started painting, what sort of came naturally to you?
I don't know if anything really came naturally. I think for just about anyone where they're starting, they seem to feel like they're struggling with just about anything. But I think it wasn't so much a part of the painting that came naturally. It was, I hear from a lot of people when they're beginning that they're struggling just because they can't do anything. They feel like they can't do it right. And I think what came more naturally to me was accepting that, I'm just starting. There's going to be a lot of mistakes. And I think right early on, I put the focus on, okay, let's learn. And especially for the first couple of years, I'm not trying to sell these. I just want to have fun with it. So I think I struggled with a lot of things, but what came naturally more was the accepting that I'm going to struggle, I guess.
That's good. That's smart. Anything that was really, really difficult for you that you can think of?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is painting portraits. I almost completely avoid that. Pet portraits as well, but mostly people. A few years ago, when my mother was very sick, I decided to try, and it would have been around the time of my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and I decided to try and out of the blue paint from their wedding photo. And I spent probably about 15 or 20 hours on it and just gave up because, probably it wasn't a good choice to start for a portrait because it was something that would be very emotional, especially since my mother was sick at the time. So it was probably starting on a difficulty scale of 1 to 10. It was probably starting at a 9 or a 10 rather than something a little bit easier. And so that maybe discouraged me from it a bit. But even since then, I haven't really had much interest in painting portraits. Probably just because there's so many other things that I enjoy painting more too.
Did your mom get better, or did she pass away?
Yeah, she passed away from cancer about 5 years ago.
I'm sorry to hear that. I really am. Let's see. How long did it take before you really felt you had your hands in oil and had a good grip on it?
On one sense, I don't think that ever comes completely. And there's various stages. I can't really think of any one time where I think, okay, I've mastered this now. There's certain times that, okay, this technique is starting to work a little better. This is starting to work a little better. But it's such an ongoing process of learning. There's so many new things. I can't really think of using the word mastered at all, really.
Mm-hmm. What do you prefer, oil or acrylic?
That's a tough one. There's some things I like oil a lot better for, certain effects like clouds and anything that needs a lot of blending and especially with use of transparent versus opaque colors. I like oil a lot better for that. If I'm doing specific detail, though, I find it a lot easier to do that with acrylic. And sometimes even I'll paint some detail with something in acrylic first, and then do oil afterwards after the acrylic is completely dry. So there's some things I like more about one and some of the other. I've gone through stages where I mostly do acrylic, and then I've gone through stages where I mostly do oil. So it really varies, and which I like more probably depends what they ask me.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you can get the depth in acrylic that you can get in oil?
It's probably easier in oil, but then it's a bit of a trade-off for me anyway for detail, especially because when I do oil, it's almost always wet on wet rather than spending layers and layers of drying.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, if you did more wet oil or if you were doing more, traditional styles. So
yeah, mostly always just wet on wet.
Yeah. Let's see. How long do you think that you are going to be an artist?
I mean, right now, I hope for the rest of my life. One nice thing about it is at least compared to the job I had working at a sawmill, hopefully I'll be able to do that a lot more in my older years. I mean, once my vision starts going, it may be difficult when I get up there in years, but I'm hoping for a few more decades.
Mm-hmm. And is your close vision, I don't know what you would call that, is it still fairly decent?
I think I'm at the age right now where it's going, and I'm probably due to be tested to get reading glasses for close vision. I'm actually maybe even a little bit past that age and lucky to have gone as far as I have. But I know I'm due for my next eye appointment before too long, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to find out that I need glasses for up close now. So I think it's starting to go.
Yeah. Anytime people are careless with their eyes, I just cringe because it's like you only have one pair of eyes.
That's right.
Let's see. You spoke a little bit about selling your work. What do you have a little tip maybe that is what's successful for you in that regard?
Well, it may seem kind of backwards, but I think especially when you're just starting to try to sell, I think the most important thing is actually to not focus on trying to sell and rather focus on trying to grow an audience. Because if you're focused on trying to sell, it can either come off as you're trying too hard just to sell it, or you're instead of trying to improve what you're doing, or instead of trying to relate to the people who might be interested in your artwork, it's just push to try and sell it. And I found that as for the first few years, for the first 2 or 3 years at least, I wasn't really trying to sell it at all. But then gradually people would ask about, oh, is this painting for sale? And then at that point I was thinking, okay, I need to grow my audience first, and then once you have a bigger following, then people are naturally going to be asking if you want to sell them. And then so it's kind of backwards to how you might think, but I just think you have to be careful when you're just trying to start out. If you try too hard to sell it, you're probably actually doing yourself more harm than good.
I think that's some of the best advice I've actually heard on that subject. That's really good advice. Let's see. My next question was, do you do commissioned work? We've already talked about that. How many pieces have you done, do you think?
That's tricky. I probably average about 3 or 4 per week. So I like, there's some that go very quickly, and some like like a fast one might go in, I might paint in half an hour, whereas the longest ones and biggest ones might take about 20 hours. So I would say probably around 500, but that would just be a rough guess. If anything, maybe a little more than that.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite piece that you've painted?
That changes a little bit. Uh, Again, when my mother was sick, there was one in particular that I painted, and it was probably partly my favorite because of the emotional attachment to it at the time. But it varies. There's been a few that, okay, this is my new favorite one, and then a few months later, okay, now this is my new favorite one. But then I'll go and look at the one that I did previously. Say, oh yeah, well, I really like this one too. So it's then of course there's sometimes the opposite, where you say, oh well, I don't know what I did this for. It didn't turn out as well as you'd hope. But and I'm always surprising too in the reaction that I get to it, because the ones that are my own favorites aren't necessarily what other people like, and vice versa. So which just goes to show different people have different tastes, which is part of human nature, I guess.
Yeah, art is in the eye of the beholder, I think. I really do.
For sure.
Yeah. Who inspires you?
I like to think that everybody inspires me, but my wife and kids definitely inspire me. Maybe not so much for specific painting subjects, but they inspire me to paint. Also, in terms of subjects, more my background in forestry inspires me. A lot of my paintings are outdoorsy type things, and also I grew up on a farm as a kid, so the country outdoor things inspire me as well.
Do you have a favorite classical artist?
That's probably not a great question to me, because honestly, I know very little about classical artists. I'd be lucky if I could even name 10 of them. Maybe I shouldn't have admitted that. I don't know, but I wouldn't say, definitely compared to before I started painting, I now have more appreciation for it. But I'm a lot more interested, I guess, in what people are doing today than what people were doing hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fair answer. You draw a lot of inspiration then kind of from the area that you live in, I take it then.
Yes, I do.
I have a question. Have you ever been, well, I have lots of questions. Have you ever been to Minnesota?
I've never been to Minnesota, no.
I see a lot of your paintings, because that's where I'm from. I see a lot of your paintings, and they remind me a lot of Minnesota. So I think
the climate there is pretty similar to here.
Yeah.
So probably a lot of the landscape is very similar to here, and maybe even more so further north in Ontario. But I did spend a couple summers in northern Ontario too, so that has an influence as well.
Are there a lot of lakes in that area?
Yes, for sure, definitely.
Yeah. Let's see. What advice do you have for somebody just getting started?
Maybe just don't be too hard on yourself. I hear all the time, especially on Facebook. There's Facebook groups where there's people that are afraid to post what they're doing, or they're just discouraged because it didn't turn out. And of course, when they look on Facebook artist groups in particular, they see these wonderful paintings by people who've been painting all their life and maybe have a completely different style, and they're always comparing themselves to what other people can do. Just don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's the best way to learn. There's all kinds of quotes from athletes about how, you're not going to learn if you don't make mistakes, or you're not going to score on the shots you don't take. And so I think that's a really important part to not just painting, but anything that you're learning. You have to be willing to make mistakes in order to be able to improve.
Mm-hmm. If you could go back into your earlier years, would you wish that you had started painting earlier?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, now that I think of it, when I was a teenager, I did take a couple lessons and didn't have much interest in it at the time. I remember now my parents got me some painting lessons, and I took them, and then the lessons ran out, and then just forgot about it for 30 years. So 30 years after that, and then started up again. But I wish I had gotten into it a lot sooner. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say I have any regrets. I mean, I did other things instead, but I'm just enjoying it that much more now, I guess.
Absolutely. What do you wish you had known when you first kind of walked into this?
I can't think of anything in particular. When I walked into it, I wasn't really thinking of I didn't really have any goals, so maybe that's partly why that's my answer. I mean, I wasn't trying to make a living at it at the time. I wasn't, expecting this, okay, this is gonna be my new hobby, I'm gonna do it all the time, and everything else goes to the wayside. Both those things kind of happened by chance as it went. Yeah, I can't think of anything in particular that, it would have been a lot easier if I'd done this instead.
Mhm. Absolutely. What is sort of your main platform online? Like, how do you connect with people?
I find Facebook works best for me. I am on Instagram too, but I don't put as much effort into it. And but initially when I started them both, I got a lot more feedback and found Facebook worked a lot more to connect with other people and bring in an audience.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, let's see. What does being an artist mean to you?
I always like to say everybody's an artist. Um, if you create something, you're an artist. Whether or not you're a good artist or a master artist is very much a matter of perspective. Just like how much is a painting worth? People ask all the time, well, how do you tell how much a painting is worth? And a painting is worth however much someone is willing to pay for it. So if it's a really beautiful piece of art and nobody sees it, it's not worth anything. Whereas if you may not like it, but a lot of people are getting some kind of enjoyment out of it, well, it may not have much monetary value, but it still has value. So it's that's a bit of a tricky one, I guess.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have children.
Yes, yep, I have two boys.
Do they paint with you at all?
They do have a little bit of interest in it. It's a kind of thing that I was careful not to push it on them too hard because I want them to sort of find their own passion for it if they do it. But anytime they've asked to, I've been eager to go with it a little bit and help them out. And I guess I did a sort of a paint night type thing with them both a couple of times. My youngest is a little bit more interest, I would say, than the other, but they've both shown some interest in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I like to line up these sort of weird bonus questions. So we've reached that little segment. First question: if you won the lottery tomorrow, would you continue to be an artist?
I can't see stopping. I doubt I would paint as much. I'm not at the point yet where I'm painting and it's okay. I've got to put out another painting. I've got to put out another painting. I enjoy it while I do it, and I think that's partly too why I avoid like commissions to some extent unless it goes along the line with what I enjoy anyway. Because I don't want to be at a spot where I'm doing this painting because I have to do it. Even though I'm using it as a profession, I still want to make sure I keep enjoying it.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the most humbling moment you have had as an artist?
Um, I think probably the first thing that comes to mind is when I taught the children's class, and just to see everyone, so many, especially kids, enjoying it as well. It doesn't. It's like it's almost like ability is entirely thrown out the window, and it's just okay. Everyone is just here doing something, and the kids we're having so much fun doing something that was so much different than their everyday class. It's like for that afternoon that I was there, it was entirely has nothing to do with how good you are or how good these kids are. It's all about um, them having a learning enjoyable experience. So
Yeah, that's great. Um, who do you think is your biggest cheerleader, your biggest supporter?
well, I have to give credit to my wife for that one. She's I think for any artist, their spouse has to put up with quite a bit, just because, especially in her case, because she really has no interest in it at all, which is certainly understandable. She's got hobbies that I don't have much interest in too, so it goes both ways. But because it's a hobby that's turned into a profession, there's that extra tolerance that is necessary. So not only is it a matter of being a cheerleader or someone who's inspiring, in order for it to work, there has to be a lot of tolerance there too.
Hmm. Um, kind of along those lines, do you hang up your wet oil paintings in different places in your house to have a place to have them dry?
I'm lucky enough that we actually just moved about a half a year ago, and I converted a section of the garage to my studio, and it's got nice 12-foot ceilings. So I built painting racks, so I have a specific spot to dry them, so they don't have to go all over the house. That way, she gets to choose which ones go where.
That's awesome. That's a challenge I think every artist has, especially oil paints. Um, kind of wrapping this up, do you have any final thoughts that you'd sort of like to share with everybody?
No, you did a great job of asking the questions. You covered just about everything I can think of.
Awesome. That's what I was going for. Awesome. So you mentioned it a little bit. Where can people find you specifically if they look for you online?
The easiest place to find me is either on Facebook or on my website. My website is just simply johnkenward.com. And my Facebook, you can find it. If you search for my name, I'm sure you'll find it too. But it's John Kenward Original Paintings is my Facebook artist page.
Okay. And you recently sort of started a little bit of a YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah, it was about a year ago, I guess. I started a YouTube channel, and I'm admittedly really not very good with anything that has anything to do with technology and video editing and that kind of thing. And to be honest, the video editing wasn't done by me. It was done by that time to my 12-year-old son, because he's much better at it than I am. And I keep telling myself that I've got to get back and do some more of those, because I enjoy making the time lapses, and they're fun to see. But there's only so many hours in the day, and sometimes that takes a back seat. But I hope to get at that some more.
You know, part of it too is like, at least for me, because I do a lot of time lapses, I like to stand in front of my easel and really get in there. But when you're recording it, you almost have to get out of the way for the camera, and
that definitely makes it tricky. And I'm one who I don't like to paint on an easel. I prefer to actually paint on a flat surface. So I have a big desk that I'm like 90% of the time or more, I'll have it down on a desk and I'm painting on it flat. And sometimes I stand, sometimes I sit. But then in terms of taking video of it, that makes it really tricky too. So then often I'll put it on an easel just for the sake of taking the video.
Wow. Yeah, that would be difficult. Okay, well, I think that's about it, John. Thank you a million for coming on. It's been really fun chatting with you.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do want to say your work is very, very, very impressive.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, guys, I think that's it for our show today. If you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section of the video. We'll do our best to address them. I'm Gabi. Again, this is John. And until next time, I really do hope you guys fall in love with oil painting just as much as we have. Bye, guys.